Yeah, my name's Chris Lawrence. I currently work for two professional associations in UK, London Drama and National Drama. I'm the editor of Drama magazine and the research journal Drama Research. This presentation is about Dorothy Heathcote Enlightened Witness, a journey from Albert to Alexander. I'll explain all that as we go along. The concept of brotherhoods is a very distinctive feature of the work of Dorothy Heathcote, as many of us will be well aware. In this presentation, I'm going to make the case that Dorothy herself is in a very special brotherhood, that of being an enlightened witness. What that is and why it is significant, not least to myself, I hope to make clear along the way. But first, just take a moment to be as if you are present with her now, feeling the calm and steadiness of her eyes in the picture of her on your screen. I first came before those eyes back in 1971, when I started a whole year of work with her on her advanced diploma course in Newcastle upon Tyne. At this time in her development, she was very excited about having her diploma students work in partnership with where one teacher works fully in role while the other facilitates that role. To place it, this is pre-mantle of the expert, before that was fully developed. The roles, she told us, should clearly represent a particular lifestyle, which included clothing and artifacts. A strong advice to us was to build the role around what is suggested by the role players' physical ambience, their non-verbal signals. Children, especially younger children, read and respond to non-verbal signals more readily than verbal ones. When the chosen role matches the non-verbal signals with reasonable congruence, the most belief is generated in the role and the most powerful teaching situation is produced. Dorothy introduced us to this style of work in preparation for our teaching in a special school attached to a mental hospital. She sat us in a circle around her and offered suggestions as to what roles may be available to us from her perceptions of our non-verbal signals, like a master sculptor eyeing the marble of our bodies to see what figure can be chiseled out and what lifestyle could be represented. There was a fortune teller, I remember, and a wild man, amongst others. When it came to me, she suggested to me that she could see, and I quote, "something of a derelict in me." This amused my colleagues, but with a beard, an old PVC coat tied with string and rags for shoes, I readily and enthusiastically transformed myself into Albert the derelict. Later, a film was made, again with special needs children, and I would like to share that film with you at this session to give you a glimpse into this style of work and its effectiveness. I've also made an analytical description of in an article I wrote for 2D magazine in 1982, and the article is available from the London Drama Resources folder, which I'll put the links in the chat at the end of the session. Before we show the film, I'd like to draw your attention to what Dorothy says at the beginning of the film about why she found this role useful. I think one of the things I'm trying to do is to introduce children to people who are not in charge of them, and introduce children to people who can ask for their help and people who can press them to dredge the bottom of the barrel to see what they can do about it. There's very little appeal made to the skills these children may have, or the tenderness these children are capable of, or the authority these children are capable of. So it strikes me that Albert as a derelict is perhaps one way of appealing to this, because so many of them only meet the person who for now has to take charge of them. They don't meet that person who has no particular power of one kind or another. The value of this seems to me that you drop children into an experience and then you find that they move into all kinds of areas that you could never have anticipated. I couldn't presume to know where those children would go. My voice does not do these words justice. When you watch the film, listen to the warmth and compassion in Dorothy's voice as she explains how she designed the session around the latent human needs of these children in the context of their relatively deprived lives. So I am so pleased to bring to your eyes and ears something of her living presence, which was such an important feature of her work, through the video Albert produced by Concord Media.
I think one of the things I'm trying to do is introduce children to people who are not in charge of them, and introduce children to people who can ask for their help, and people who can press them to sort of dredge the bottom of the barrel to see what they can do about it. There's very little appeal made to the skills these children may have, or the tenderness these children are capable of, or the authority these children are capable of. And so it struck me that Albert as a derelict was perhaps one way of appealing to this, because so many of them only meet the person who for now has to take charge of them. They don't meet that person who has no particular power of one kind or another. The value of this seems to me that you drop children into an experience, and then one finds they move into all kinds of areas that you just could never anticipate. I couldn't presume to know where those children would go. Now, what I want to know is, do you always have big heaps of newspaper in your hall?
No.
It's not a man, surely. Debbie, come and look. Go on. You're in our hall. This is our hall, isn't it?
Yeah.
We have our dinners here. Is he frightened? What did he say? He looks a bit frightened.
What's your name? Oh, no. Let's go touch him.
Yes, you help him. See if you can get him to get up. We won't take them away. You can have them. Are they yours? Must be his newspaper. What's your name?
Kathy. Kathy. Hey, Kathy.
What's his name?
Hello.
What's your name?
Kathy.
Tell us.
Hello.
Tell everybody.
What? Only bunny.
What did he say? Listen, and then we'll hear. Albert. This is Debbie. Albert.
Debbie, come on. You might not like him.
She might be frightened.
Yes, Mom. I like him, Albert.
Come on, Albert. That's nice. Come on, Albert.
Hurry, get up.
Come on. Oh, he's getting up.
No, that's you.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, that's stand.
Does he want to stand up?
No.
Well, let him sit down a bit, eh? Let's have a good look at him. Albert, can I straighten your papers? Will you let me? Oh, look at his trousers. I won't hurt them. Oh.
I got chair.
Have you got anything else as well as a teddy?
What does he see?
Can you see anything? I wonder what he's got in his tin.
He may got money.
Have you got any money in your tin, Albert?
Have you got any money in your tin? Money. Oh, no. Nothing.
Have you got any sweeties in, Albert? Don't frighten him. He'll put it away if you do. And then we'll never know what's inside.
No.
He'll put it away. An egg cup? Have you got an egg cup in there, Albert?
You got a cut in the cottage.
He'll put it away. Look, he's going to put... Oh.
What's in?
Let's all sit back again and see.
What's in here? I have to, Albert. I have to.
She's going to help you, Albert.
Go to baby. I have to yard Happy
But we want to see things in the tin.
Oh, no. I do have my mommy could love.
Would she love him? Would she let him come home with you?
Come on, Marcus. I'll tell mommy, come on.
We'll have to show him to Miss Gordon first, though, I think. Because Mrs. Gordon will know where he came from. I wonder where Albert came from.
Anyway, up
Above the roof? Did you come from above the roof? Poor Albert. Look at his shoes.
See, Mummy. I think I just take a part of me. You say so. I got my pizza, Johnny. You peel my pizza, please.
Albert, shall we sing to you? Shall we sing to Albert?
Yes!
Can we hold hands? What shall we sing for Albert? Well, you start.
Hippopotamus, I guess the hippopotamus, I guess the army. Clever girl.
You are a clever girl. Can we help you, Albert?
Harry.
Oh, those poor shoes, Albert. Can he walk? Well, let him try by himself. There's your teddy bear. What shall we do with Albert? Could he have his dinner in the school? What's for dinner today, then? Pudding?
What's
for dinner?
I washed the
Potatoes. Do you like potatoes, Albert?
I got my tenders.
What else is for dinner?
A pudding.
Puddings. Do you like puddings, Albert?
You did it.
That's right. We don't know where he came from.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Can we put him in your office?
I think we will.
Till dinner time?
Can we put him in the office till dinner time?
And where will he go after? Oh, do you think your mummy'd let him live with you? Oh, that's nice. Well, we'll bring him to your office, Miss. You bring him along to my office. Thank you.
Come on. I'll take you.
Well, she's going to take him home to her mummy, I think. Come on, Albert. He can walk in those shoes, can't he? Education is not taking them to where you are. Education seems to me that you open the doors and support them through them and turn back with them to find another door so that people grow from inside themselves like pears go rotten. I know it sounds a bit funny, but you know, pears achieve their own development into old age from inside. And we don't do this with kids. We keep on laying these plasters of facades over that are so irrelevant. And of course, with this comes an extra comfort. I mean, I do it all for comfort, let's face it, I don't do it for hard work. It's so much easier to live with yourself as a person if every night you can say, I tried not to win against the child. I tried to let him win something for himself.
The session has clearly evidenced the opportunities for tenderness, skill and authority that the children are capable of, but rarely have the opportunity to express. Note that Dorothy is also in role as if she's one of the children. You're in our hall. We have our dinners in here. The physicality of the role player is important, but Dorothy's own physicality is also important. She's using the non-verbal signaling of her body, sitting with them on the floor, owning the space as if she is one of them, and using her body and voice as a physical home base for the children, a familiar place of security as they explore the unfamiliar presence of Albert, all the while caught up in the implied tension between the two. A third party was the lighting and filming equipment and crew in their hall too, and Debbie spent some time before the filming whizzing around it excitedly. Dorothy's calm presence and warm voice brought her and the whole group to a place of focus. She's here acting as an ally to the children, as Peter Slade would say, a loving ally. I draw your attention to what Dorothy says at the end of the session. Education is not taking them to where you are. Education seems to me that you open the doors and support them through them and turn back with them to find another door so that people grow from inside themselves like pears grow rotten. I know it sounds a bit funny, but you know, pears achieve their own development into old age from inside. And we don't do this with kids. We keep on laying these plasterers of facades over. It's so irrelevant. And of course, with this comes an extra comfort. I mean, I do it for comfort. I don't do it for hard work. It's so much easier to live with yourself as a person if any night you can say, I tried not to win against the child. I tried to let him to win something for himself. Note the implied criticism of the orientation of the education system, which may not only ignore the needs of the child, but actually impede their growth. We keep on layering these plasters of facades over. It's so irrelevant. While Dorothy's stance is here critical of the way education is perceived, she also suggests a way forward. It's so much easier to live with yourself as a person if any night you can say, I tried not to win against the child. I tried to let him to win something for himself. What she says here, and at the beginning of the film, and how she seeks to empower these vulnerable children in the session, are classic examples of what the psychotherapist Alice Miller would recognize as actions of an enlightened witness. This is what someone says of Alice Miller. According to the famed psychotherapist Alice Miller, an enlightened witness is someone who compassionately listens to us and validates our experience of abuse, pain, or injustice without judgment or denouncement. Furthermore, she believes that having an enlightened witness is critical for healing from an abused past and not repeating the cycle of abuse. Additionally, an enlightened witness doesn't judge you, invalidate you, give you advice, or try to brush away your reality. Most importantly, they don't try to defend the people who harmed you or ask you to forgive and forget. They simply bear witness to your painful emotions of anger, rage, shame, guilt, fear, loss, neglect. Their attuned presence allows you to make sense and process your feelings with regard to the past and present. Here is the person who's being talked about here. Again, a calm, steady gaze against the background representation of a child. Alice Miller, 1923 to 2010, was a Polish-Swiss Jewish psychologist and psychoanalyst whose relevance to us as educators is important because of her lifetime focus on children and their experiences. She's noted for her books on parental child abuse, like The Drama of the Gifted Child and Thou Shalt Not Be Aware, Society's Betrayal of the Child. In her short essay, The Essential Role of an Enlightened Witness in Society, she opens it with this Heathcote-like wondering. Since adolescence, I've always wondered why people take pleasure in humiliating others. Clearly, the fact that some people are sensitive to the suffering of others proves that the destructive urge is not a universal aspect of human nature. So why do some tend to solve their problems by violence, while others don't? The simplicity of her quest is deceptively profound. As a young Jewish woman who survived life in Poland in World War II, this is a question which was highly relevant to the time she lived in. And she went on to make studies of the early lives of Hitler and Stalin in this respect. Likewise, with her own clients, her professional investigations into their abused early lives, drew similar parallels. When I asked for details about their childhood, I was always told of a person who loved them, but was unable to protect them. Yet through his or her presence, this person gave them a notion of trust and of love. I call these persons helping witnesses. The conclusion that she came to was, after studying the matter for years, it seems clear to me that information about abuse inflicted during childhood is recorded in our body cells as a sort of memory linked to repressed anxiety. If, lacking the aid of an enlightened witness, these memories fail to break through to consciousness, they often compel the person to violent acts that reproduce the abuse suffered in childhood, which was repressed in order to survive. If we remind ourselves how many of us start out in life, we get a picture like this. An infant keeps its head poised through balance, the muscles in its back supporting the spine perfectly erect. There's no tension in the neck muscles and no sense of the fatigue that adults associate with sitting up straight. And no sign of abuse to what is a most beautiful poised body. The balanced interrelationship between the head, the neck, and the back that we see here is what teachers of the Alexander technique refer to as good use of the self. You can see why Miller regarded abuse to bodies like this is likely to have a significant impact on people in later life. In fact, what happens to most of us in life is that through our experience of life and through the force of gravity, we accumulate tensions in our bodies, which lead to various forms of imbalance, which are so familiar to us that they may almost go unnoticed. Why was there something of a derelict in me? To return to the work with Albert, Dorothy Heathcote was not only an enlightened witness to the children, she was also an enlightened witness to me through the role that my presentation of self suggested to her, that of Albert the derelict. To cut a long story short, at the age of 3 in the spring of 1948, in the year of the creation of the National Health Service, I contracted double pneumonia and I was rushed to hospital and placed in what they called in those days an oxygen tent to support my breathing and, in effect, to save my life. I've come to understand that this traumatic event registered itself in my infant muscles in the way Miller describes, and has provided my body with many areas of tension, particularly to the movement of my rib cage and lower back, causing my breathing to be restricted and affecting the good use of myself. This remained unhealed. So 23 years later, when Dorothy Heathcote ran her expert eye over my nonverbal signals and so accurately identified a derelict within me, she was witnessing me in a very profound way. Indeed, at that time, I can remember that being Albert felt strangely truthful, as if I was getting in touch with something hitherto undiscovered, but real about myself, which indeed I was. Later, I came to see that Albert was not only a powerful teaching tool for others, he also became a very valuable lens for me, a lens through which I can glimpse and better understand the childhood experience that I was not previously aware of and which has affected my later life. As William Wordsworth puts it, the child is father of the man. But it is not enough to be aware of these things, important as that is. It is also important to see if things can be changed. One day in my local library, a book caught my eye, Body Learning by Michael Gelb. One passage inside leapt out at me. Our reaction to disturbing events throws our bodies into chronic imbalance. We tend to hold the memory of a traumatic experience in a particular part of the body. This muscular memory in time becomes part of the total pattern and is incorporated into an individual's use of him or herself. Failure to take responsibility for one's use ensures that the memory remains. It resonated with my understanding of myself at that time, and you can see the correlation with the words of Alice Miller. The book also offered a way forward, a practice that you can engage with, which can mitigate against the dangers of these unconscious habits that Miller believed were so dangerous. The book was subtitled An Introduction to the Alexander Technique, and the author is a teacher of the technique. It caused me soon after to seek out an Alexander teacher and book some lessons with them, which brings me to a third figure of influence in this respect. Frederick Matthias Alexander, the originator of the Alexander technique. Again, just feel the presence of those seeing eyes. Alexander was a professional actor in Tasmania when he experienced a persistent loss of his voice. In attempting to resolve the issue, he discovered that the problem was not just a local issue with his vocal cords, it was a matter of the alignment of his whole body, particularly the relationship between his head, neck, and back, which he termed the primary control. His acquired habits of life had worked against a free relationship between them, but he taught himself how to project his head forward and up in a way that enabled his voice to be released and function freely. The educationist and philosopher John Dewey had many lessons with Alexander and believed that Alexander's methods were a profoundly significant solution to the problem of unconscious and unwanted habits, which generally elude our awareness. The hardest thing to attend to is that which is closest to ourselves, that which is most constant and familiar. And this closest something is precisely ourselves, our own habits and ways of doing things. Never before, I think, has there been such an acute awareness of the failure of all remedies and forces external to the individual man. It is, however, one thing to teach the need to return to the individual man as the ultimate agency in whatever mankind and society can collectively accomplish. It is another thing to discover the concrete procedure by which this greatest of all tasks can be executed. And this indispensable thing is exactly what Mr. Alexander has accomplished. It is not my purpose here to venture further into all the features of the Alexander technique, because I'd not begin to do it justice. And once started, I will not be able to stop. But here are some interesting parallels between F.M. Alexander and Dorothy Heathcote. Both came from theatre backgrounds, both set out on acting careers and then became teachers. Each created a method of teaching and learning which has profound significance. Each implicitly had the same guiding question at the centre of their professional lives. What is the humanness of a human being? Both taught by a method that gave their pupils an experience of the possible. Both set out to make the familiar unfamiliar and the unfamiliar familiar, and each aimed for transformation as a hallmark of their teaching. In fact, in my exploration of the technique, I've discovered a whole table of similarities between the principles of Dorothy Heathcote's teaching and principles of the Alexander technique. The main difference is one that is related mainly to interactions with groups, and the other focuses on the individual's relation to themselves. And of course, these two areas are not really separate, but are interdependent. How you relate to yourself will affect how you interact with the groups you teach. Here are some principles of Heathcote's teaching and in teacher enrolled situation in particular, compared with some principles of the Alexander technique. Now, this is much too small to see on this screen, but at the end of the session, I'll give you a link to the whole folder of the materials I've used in this presentation. There are too many items in the list to go into any depth, but I think it's enough to see that the principles of each field have a remarkable correlation. I've worked my way through this. Both teachers were concerned with the concept of the whole person, and both focused on process. Alexander called this the means whereby action was carried out. And we know about Dorothy's focus on process. Both were oriented in uncovering what their pupils already know, and both sought and achieved transformation in their pupils. But one principle that is common to the teaching of both is worth pausing and focusing on for a moment. End gaining, short-circuiting processes to gain quick results. For Dorothy Heathcote, this was, she called it withholding expertise, saying no to the desire to tell old teaching habits, so new experiences have space to happen. Trust your materials. In the Alexander technique, it's called inhibiting end gaining, saying no to the old body-mind habits so that new experiences of your body has space to happen, leaving yourself alone. To achieve new knowledge for children and young people, Dorothy recommended withholding expertise and challenging the temptation to engage in telling. This enabled new knowledge to come into being. Similarly, there is a concept of resisting what Alexander teachers call end gaining, the desire to do things unthinkingly to achieve a result. Consciously inhibiting this habit enables a more harmonious and natural use of yourself. Most of the world, including the world of education, is caught up in end gaining. It is obsessed with targets and boxes to tick, systems of gaining ends by whatever means, which can abuse the humanity in people and put us under stress and anxiety. The layers Dorothy referred to earlier are in this category. Because there is so much end gaining going on in society, it is very difficult to challenge, and it's very disempowering. Learning the practice of keeping your neck free and your head going forward and up can restore a sense of balance, calm, and empowerment. Thus, the subtitle to this presentation, A Journey from Albert to Alexander, encapsulates my particular story. The journey started with me lying on the floor under a pile of newspapers. It continues with me from time to time, also lying on the floor in what Alexander called the semi-supine position, with the head supported by a small pile of books, with my knees bent and pointing towards the ceiling, arms resting on my hips. This helps the back to lengthen and widen, and for the neck to become free, releasing the primary control. It also has a meditative effect. Thoughts and memories, as well as body tensions, are acknowledged and witnessed in an enlightened way, with kindness, compassion, and quiet energy. The kind of compassion energy that Dorothy expressed with the children in the video. Which brings me to the general question: what is the significance of the enlightened witness in society today? Some would argue there is not only an individual or educational significance, as outlined so far, but also a profound political necessity to encourage enlightened witnesses in society. The psychologists Lucien Lombardo and Karen Polanco refer to the last century as a post-traumatic culture. Clearly, the experiences of the past century have challenged our humanity and led us to exhibit the maladaptive traits of dehumanization. Kirby Farrell calls this period, when surviving trauma seeps into deep cultural forms of expression, the post-traumatic culture. Coombs characterizes this as a period of phony culture, where the confidence man, one who preys on the good faith of others, is hero, and hype, events for profit rather than meaning, immediacy, focus on short-term gain versus long-term development, frivolity, action for action's sake, devoid of human meaning, and artificiality, lack of authenticity in life, dominate our personal and social interactions and their cultural expressions. These conditions then lead us to turn a blind eye to the suffering and death of our fellow human beings. They lead us to turn a deaf ear to their cries. These conditions make us silent in response to what we know is wrong. These conditions keep us from facing the truth buried in our knowledge of the suffering that is all around us. In the age of Donald Trump and other political leaders of his type, and I'm sure you will have your own list, I think we've become aware of the dangers of the phony culture, fake news, where the confidence man is hero, and hype, immediacy, frivolity, and artificiality dominate our personal and social interactions and their cultural expressions. As the authors say, these conditions then lead us to turn a blind eye to the suffering and death of our human beings. To counter dehumanization and become more human, we must be able to reduce our emotional distance from other human beings, take personal responsibility for our actions, become more involved in addressing human needs, learn to oppose dominant group attitudes that promote suffering of others, and grow in our feelings of empowerment and belonging. To do this, we must begin to confront the forces of dehumanization and the violence that is in our world and within ourselves, and become enlightened witnesses. The enlightened witness speaks and acts on his and her knowledge of suffering, and as such can help us find a way towards our individual and common humanity. In placing Dorothy Heathcote in the brotherhood of the enlightened witness, her significance is perceived not just to the world of education and pedagogy, but also in the broadest possible sense to the world of healing and political progression, and places her among all those in the world who will help us find a way forward towards our individual and common humanity, making the world a better and more human place to live. I ask you, do you have an enlightened witness in your life? If so, who? I hope you have had, because not everyone who witnesses you is enlightened.